I've got one for Meg to kick things off. And that's around where we left you, Meg. You were talking about sort of the individual having a clear mind and stepping up and improving their game. At the moment, obviously, there's a lot of individuals out there who may be finding it uncomfortable in this current environment or whatever, just, a bit different. What are some things people can do to cope their way through this?
Yeah, so when we talk about resilient responses, which is really what we're talking about, is individuals having sort of healthy, resilient responses to change and challenge. That's our little kind of catch cry. And that means a lot of things, but what it doesn't mean is being stoic, and what it doesn't mean is beating yourself up, and what it doesn't mean is being mentally tough or having grit, a lot of those terms are used so often, but they don't have a lot of meaning when you're a struggling person who's struggling, or just everything's foggy. You're having a foggy day, or you're having a foggy week or a month. So we like to think of resilience as being what we call a resource acquisition skill. So I develop the skills to acquire resources to support me. Those resources could be in the environment that I work in. They could be in my workplace or amongst my social support network, or they could be internally. So the first thing that I would do is I would have a sit down and I would think, where are the sources of support and strength for me? And if I've got a really great knack of sitting back and reflecting and putting things into perspective, then I should draw on that. I should do more of that, because that's working for me. If I have a really great knack of drawing deep on the relationships, having really strong reciprocal relationships with people in my network, then I should do that. If I have a wide network of people that I trust, then I should draw from that network that I trust and put myself out there, because being vulnerable as part of this process is also helpful. It can help people understand that you need support and that you are and you're ready to listen as well. I guess the other thing, that maintaining perspective is a really important part of any kind of model of resilience or any way of thinking about resilience. But it's a practice, and it leads us to a mindset that allows us to deal with the things that are going on. Mindsets don't come naturally though, and people that tell other people you've just got to have an optimistic mindset. Just got to be optimistic. It's like, well, it's the same thing as saying suck it up, really, which is unhelpful. It doesn't help anyone to say that. So we know that optimism is a process, and optimism is a practice. You have to practice the skills for optimism. It comes naturally to some people, absolutely. But the advantages, and there are personality traits that come more naturally too as well, but those advantages are really minor compared to the practices of optimism. And that includes looking for options, stepping back and forcing yourself to sit down and write down the options. Once you've got it on a piece of paper, it's no longer swirling in your head, it's tangible. You're dealing with something that's tactile. It's a piece of paper, or it could be a computer screen. Most people find the piece of paper adds to the process. It's acknowledging the emotion that you're experiencing and giving it a name, and making sure you understand what impact it's having on your body and how it's changing your thought processes. That's important source of information. If I'm experiencing anger, for example, I kind of know what's important to me. I just have to figure out if that anger is misplaced or not. But I'm not going to do that until I sit down and actually sit with that emotion, give it a name, and you know what, is it appropriate? Do I really want to be experiencing anger right now? If I do, that's fine. Go for it. Own it. Let yourself be angry, but just know that probably going to have to tone it down for a more helpful response in the long run. So I think it's like being really honest with yourself about what you're experiencing from an emotional point of view, the impact that it's having on your thought processes. Are those thought processes realistic, or have I catastrophize things, you know, and I hesitate to say that because I think in times of COVID, you know, it sounds patronizing to say just catastrophizing things, but actually it's not necessarily about a pandemic. It's about how much have I blown this out of proportion for my own self and my own life and the moment that I'm in right now. So yeah, those are some of the things that we talk to people about, and particularly the sitting with emotions and using them as a source of information, I think is a really big shift for a lot of people who've just been putting on a brave face for a little too long. It wears you down. Yeah.
So in a sense, they're tapping into their curiosity. It's like, oh, isn't this interesting? I'm super angry at the moment. And then once they can do that, then they've switched something in their brain, and then they can literally step back from it and become like a mad scientist. Not, apologies for using the word mad, but you know what I mean?
It's like being a detective. I kind of think switching into detective mode. Yeah. Switching into detective mode. And, you know, I once said a beagle dog, like sniffing it out. Then I realized I was offending a whole bunch of people calling them beagle dogs. So I didn't really. So it's like being a detective and taking, as you say, taking a really, taking things on with curiosity. And I know that can sometimes sound woo-woo to some people, but it's a process. It's not just a magical thing that happens. It's actually a process, and there's bucket loads of science that back up the fact that that comes from the traditions of cognitive behavioral therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy. Those are the traditions that a lot of these ideas come from. There's bucket loads of science backing up those particular therapies. And what we've done is and what a lot of people who work in our field do is take those traditions and make them accessible for people who maybe they are their own resource. Basically, they don't need to access counseling. They don't feel they need to access support elsewhere, but they are their own resource. So